Hello, my name's Richard Felix and I'm going to take you on a tour of haunted Warwickshire. Over the past 10 years I've been leading tours, ghostly tours, to some of the most haunted places in Great Britain. Some of the stories we're going to be talking about will be to do with real ghosts, entities and spectres, spirits that are really still haunting places for one reason or another, either because they love the place or for some reason their tormented soul has been captivated on the spot and can't be released. It's waiting to gain release. Others, I believe, are nothing more than a recording. They're to do with tragic, traumatic, premature death. Their time hadn't come. That's suicides, accidents, executions, murders, and of course battles. And of course, what better place to start that tour than here at Warwick Castle, built in 1068 under the orders of William the Conqueror. And so over 1,000 years of death and destruction have taken place here. So settle back, give me your full attention, dim the lights, and let me take you on a tour of haunted Warwickshire. I'm standing on the mound. This is the highest point at Warwick. This was the first part to be fortified in 1068. It was originally a wooden stockade, but by 1260 this had become a massive stone castle keep. And through these gates here, down below, is the most magnificent medieval castle in the whole of England. And the view from under here is absolutely breathtaking. There are, of course, many stories of ghosts to do with Warwick Castle. One of the most famous is that of a black dog. It's supposedly the changed form of a farm girl called Nell Bloxham. For some reason, the Earl would not allow her to sell produce and milk to the castle, and she died in poverty in her cottage beneath the walls of this castle. The number of spirits of animals that are seen, the number of black dogs, white dogs, small and large dogs, all with red staring eyes, means that animals, just like humans, have managed to avoid the process of death. But probably one of the most famous haunted sites here at Warwick, down here on the right hand side, is the Ghost Tower. Let's go down and have a look. And of course behind me stands the famous Ghost Tower of Warwick Castle. But let's go inside and have a look and see what terrors it holds. What stories can be told from within. As I climb the steps, a gentleman called Sir Fulk Grenville was murdered by his manservant in London. He was Lord Chancellor of England, and for some strange reason, no one knows why, but they say that his ghost still haunts this tower. And I presume this is the gentleman, Sir Fulk Grenville. They say that he didn't die straight away after being stabbed by his manservant. But they say that the doctor botched the job of repairing his wounds so much that 20 odd days later he died in terrible agony.
Is haunted. Absolutely. If you dare learn the murderous history of this tower, then listen to the ghosts that walk it.
Not many miles from Warwick itself lies the little hamlet of Guy's Cliff, and that's where I am now. At the back of me is a hill called Blacklow Hill. Apparently it was once an ancient burial ground, and over to the right of me is an old Saxon mill. There's a monument on the top of that hill, and a very dastardly deed took place on top of that hill in 1312. Looks like I've got quite a walk ahead of me, because that's where I'm going. I'm now wearily making my way up the hill here at Blacklow. In 1312, a young Gascon called Piers Gaveston, a personal favourite of King Edward II, was having more than a few disputes with the barons. They hated him. They were also trying to get rid of Edward II. Gaveston was captured at Scarborough and brought by the Earl of Warwick to Warwick Castle. Gaveston was put on trial in the Great Hall at Warwick. It was he who stated that the great Earl was in fact the Black Dog of Arden, and during the trial the Earl said that he would make Gaveston feel the teeth of that dog, and that was so true. Gaveston was brought here in procession on a large charger, brought up to the top of this hill, and was beheaded by the barons not far from this spot. In 1821, a monument was put up to Piers Gaveston. The story was that his ghost still haunted this area. After the beheading, the body was put into a coffin and taken back to Warwick Castle, but the head was left here. And many months later, that severed head was found near this spot by a wandering friar. And ever since, for hundreds of years in fact, this hill was believed to be haunted. And in 1821, the local squire, Bertie Greathead, had this monument put up, hopefully to lay the ghost of Gaveston to rest. And on the other side of this monument, to this very day, is an inscription. And it reads, "In the hollow of this rock was beheaded on the 1st day of July 1312 by barons lawless as himself, Piers Gaveston, Earl of Cornwall, the minion of a hateful king, in life and death, a memorial instance of misrule." There is also said to be a ghostly procession that is seen coming along the road from Warwick. It leads up the hill. Included in the procession are barons in their finery, and Piers Gaveston, pale, deathly looking, slumped over the horse, rides up the hill here. They can hear the jingling of bells. One of Gaveston's habits was to have a ring of bells draped around the horse's neck. And people say that on a windy night, that even if you can't see the ghostly procession, people can still hear the joyful jingling bells as he rides up to the top of this hill to dismount and be beheaded on this very spot. And I'm now approaching William Shakespeare's birthplace. Shakespeare was born here in April 1564. In the reign of King James I, Shakespeare wrote one of his most famous plays, Macbeth, with James in mind. King James I was fascinated by witches and witchcraft, and the number of poor unfortunate old ladies who were persecuted during that reign just because they had a black cat, or because old Mrs. So-and-so kissed the baby and 2 days later it developed a rash. We didn't burn witches in England, we hanged them. And the number of poor old ladies who were hanged in this country during the reign of King James III is incredible. And strangely enough, although I'm in the centre of historic Stratford-on-Avon, it's not easy to find ghost stories. And I've just been into a bookshop called Mayor and been told by a member of staff that she used to work, strangely enough, across the road here in another bookshop, Waterstones. And on the top floor there's a ghost. On many occasions when she went upstairs to the top floor, she got this very, very strange sensation that she wasn't alone, and the temperature used to drop. And while I was in the same shop, another member of staff told me that her mother used to live up here on the top floor, and at night she used to see the figure of a man standing at the bottom of her bed. But she never dared tell her parents in case they laughed at her. And I'm now standing outside a very, very old pub, opposite the church in the centre of Henley-in-Arden. And there's a ghost of a girl inside the building. So let's go in and see if we can find anybody that may have experienced her. We're now in the haunted bedroom of the old White Swan in the centre of Henley-in-Arden. This building goes back 400-500 years, and in here, in about 1875, a young girl that worked here called Virginia Black was having a lover's tiff with her boyfriend Henry Bishop. The two of them started arguing in here, and then they spilled out here onto the staircase, and Henry pushed her. He pushed her down these stairs, and she fell to the bottom here, cracked her head, and lay there bleeding profusely from a very large wound on the side of her head. Henry was terrified. He ran off, but the girl wasn't dead. She crawled back up this staircase, crawled along the landing, and she died on the threshold of her bedroom here. And they say that this room is still haunted by her ghost. One or two things have happened in here. There's often an icy chill about the room, even when the central heating's on. And the bedclothes get pulled off the people that are sleeping in this bedroom. And I'm now entering the Church of St Denis at Little Compton. It has a tragic ghost story. A young curate came to live here in 1870. His name was Mr Drain. Not long after coming here, he met a girl called Miss Fielding, who flirted with him. He became very fond of her, but she was leading him astray, and she was actually betrothed to another. Mr. Drain was most upset by this, but carried on living his life and continued his practices here as curate. But when Miss Fielding announced her wedding, she decided, of course, that she wanted to be married here at the church. She said that she wanted to be married by Mr. Drain, and the poor unfortunate curate had to carry out the wedding ceremony, giving her away to another man. After the ceremony was over, Mr. Drain disappeared. No one saw him for the whole of that day. But the following day, someone came here to the church and found Mr. Drain hanging from the bell rope, dead. And they say that his unfortunate ghost still wanders around this church, in this lovely churchyard. Next to the church of St Dennis at Little Compton stands Little Compton Manor, a beautiful old Cotswold stone house. This was the home for many years of Bishop Juxon. Bishop Juxon was the Bishop of London who stood on the scaffold with King Charles I before his execution. He was also the last man to be with the King when he said goodbye to his children. On the scaffold, King Charles I took his ring and gave it to the bishop and said one word to him: remember. And of course, Bishop Juxon always did remember his king. He moved here and took a low profile, but of course for many years he was watched very carefully by Oliver Cromwell and his men. And they say that on a cold, windy night that people can still hear the voice of Bishop Juxon echoing along the long passages of this hall, saying the prayers that he was denied during Oliver Cromwell's Commonwealth. And this is a bit of a scoop. I've actually been allowed to come inside Little Compton Hall. It belongs to the Reed Business School, and they're telling me that not only are the voices of Bishop Juxon heard upstairs, but they also have other ghosts. And on the very top floor, they say that you walk into one of the attic rooms, the temperature drops, and you can sense that you're not alone up there. But then again, of course, what Cotswold manor houses don't have ghosts? But there's also a ghost down here. On at least 3 occasions, a figure has been seen walking across this room and disappearing straight through that door. Why it didn't open it, I don't know, but that door has been here for a long time. I can't go through it. I'm going to open it and see what is on the other side. But it open like that. And what an old door this is. And outside, into the splendour of the grounds of Little Compton Hall. And I'm now arrived on top of the hill overlooking Little Compton and Long Compton at the Rollright Stones, the King's Men Standing Stones, or the Whispering Knights. This huge stone circle here is a powerhouse of energy. This could well be the reason why the surrounding villages of this hill are so cursed with ghost stories, witches, murders, sightings of black dogs and pagan rites. In 1949, a black mass was held within these stones. And an incredible article written in 1979 in the monthly Alpha magazine by Dr. G.V. Robbins, which says it provides proof of the existence of some pulsating forces emanating from the group of rollright stones. And it goes on to say, might this be the catalyst that enables witnesses to see ghosts? I believe that some events can actually be recorded, especially into stone. They believe that stone contains certain properties that can hold a recording, just like magnetic cassettes, videotapes and photographic paper. Perhaps that's why so many things emanate from here. There is also an incredible story, a witch's story, to do with a pagan knight who believed that if he and his knights came to the top of this hill and looked out over Longcompton Church, that he would become King of England. But unfortunately, they hadn't contended on the curse of the witch called Mother Shipton. She stood upon Longcompton Hill and glared upon the vale. Ere tomorrow's height, I'll blast the might of king and men in mail. I spy them in the borough, but me they cannot spy. The king before, the men 2score, I'll blast them with mine eye. They shall not reach the hilltop, Longcomb they ne'er shall see. For with that sight is gained the right, old England's king to be. Here on the windy headland, I'll freeze them all to stones. My cruel spell and trick to hell shall turn to flint their bones. All round the ruddy flare they sit and sip and sing. Tomorrow we, Longcomb, shall see and crown great England's king. They leave to you her den hard by, their vein burst heard with glee, and clutching in her shrivelled hand, she stirred the deadly pottage and muttered horribly. And are these the king's men that have been turned to stone? This is the churchyard at Longcompton. Up on the hill there, the rollright stones, within easy view of this church and churchyard. Late in 1879, James Haywood murdered an 80-year-old lady called Anne Tennant. He said she was a witch, and that there were 16 other witches in this area that deserved the same fate. He was brought for trial at the Warwick Assizes and found to be insane. After the Black Mass in 1949, 2 furniture men delivering in this area were parked in a lay-by in the village. Suddenly, from nowhere, appeared a hideous old lady, at least 70-year-old, with black, matted hair and a grey shawl. She walked across the road in front of them. They were so shocked that they stood and stared at her. And then she disappeared. They wandered to the spot where they'd seen her, and there was nothing there. They wonder if that could have been the witch or the ghost of Anne Tennant. And in 1979, a Mrs. Downs of Longcompton wrote in a letter that many villagers here at Long Compton had seen the ghost of an old lady with matted hair and a shawl in the centre of the village. And they wonder if that is the ghost of Anne Tennant, still haunting the village to this day. I'm standing halfway up Meon Hill, overlooking the medieval village of Lower Quinton. On February the 14th, St Valentine's Day, 1945, a 74-year-old rheumatic hedge cutter called Charles Walton was murdered near this site. He lived in the village with his niece Edith. Despite his rheumatism, he still went to work. And at 6 o'clock one morning, he left the house with his billhook in one hand and his pitchfork in the other and set off up here to do some hedge cutting. He always returned home about 4 o'clock in the evening, and by 5:30, Edith was worried. So she went round to the neighbour next door and asked if they could get some people to come and have a look to see if Charles was all right. It was pitch black by this time. They came up this hill, and then someone with a torch looked into the hedgerow and they saw the body of Charles Walters. One of the neighbours kept Edith away because of the horrible sight, and they sent her back down the hill to fetch the police. The police came back and a murder investigation was launched. It was a horrendous murder. Charles Walters had been battered over the head with a large stick, and his two-pronged pitchfork had been plunged straight through his neck with such force that it was buried 6 inches in the ground. And over his body and his neck were crosses slashed with his billhook. Warwickshire police took the right decision and invited Scotland Yard to come to help. And they sent no less than Detective Superintendent Robert Fabian of the Yard, who took over the case. At first, Detective Robert Fabian and his assistant were getting on quite well, but things were going to take a turn for the worst. And to quote Fabian's autobiography, "I climbed Meon Hill, a bleak and lonely spot, to examine the scene of the crime for myself. A black dog, a retriever, sat on a nearby wall just for a moment. Then it trotted past me. I didn't look at it again. Shortly afterwards, a farm boy came along. 'Looking for your dog?' I asked him. 'What dog?' he said. 'A black dog.' The lad didn't wait to hear any more. He fled down the hill. Instantly, word spread through the village that I had seen the ghost." And now another extract from a book entitled Folklore, Old Customs and Superstitions in Shakespeare Land, written by an equally obscure Warwick parson in 1930. And remember, this story is from 1945. At Ulverston, a plough lad named Charles Walton met a dog on his way home 9 times in successive evenings. He told both the shepherd and the carter with whom he worked, and was laughed at for his pains. On the 9th encounter, a headless lady rushed past him in a silk dress, and on the next day he heard of his sister's death, and the name was Charles Walton. This was 15 years before the murder took place. Whether or not the Scotland Yard detectives believed in the existence of the Warwickshire witches, we'll never know. He certainly got very little help from the villagers. All they said to him was, "It's best left alone," especially after the body of a black dog was found hanging from a tree near to the murder site. The case was never solved. Robert Fabian returned to London, and Charles Walters was buried in the sleepy little graveyard next to the Norman church at Lower Quinton. And in retrospect, Fabian often wondered whether there was to be something to be taken from the Lower Quinton mystery. I advise anyone who is tempted at any time to venture into black magic, witchcraft or Satanism, call it what you will, to remember Charles Walton and to think of his death, which was so clearly the ghastly climax of a pagan rite. There is no stronger argument for keeping as far away as possible from the villains with their swords, incense and mumbo-jumbo. It is prudence on which your future peace of mind and even your life could depend. I'm searching for a particular grave here in the graveyard at Lillington, which is now a suburb of Royal Leamington Spa. I'm looking for the grave of Billy Treen, and I've found it. It's here. This gravestone says, "In memory of William Treen." He was 77 years old when he died, and he was born in 1733. He was a road sweeper here in the village of Lillington, and they say that he lived very frugally, to such an extent that he only ever ate Brussels tops, carrot tops and potato skins, which he either begged from people, or if they wouldn't give them to him, then he used to take them from the top of their midden or their rubbish tip. He lived to the ripe old age of 77, died and was buried on the parish. Someone put up this quite good memorial stone to him, and at the bottom of the memorial stone, you can only just read it now, the inscription says, "Poorly lived and poorly died, poorly buried and no one cried." I suppose, living to the age of 77, it's highly unlikely there was anybody else left alive to mourn him. They say that he left a hoard, some treasure behind, because he never spent any money. No one found it. He lived in a very old crooked cottage somewhere in the village, which unfortunately has long been demolished. But in 1922, a couple living there who always said that the house was haunted, and one of the bedrooms in particular, the lady of the house would never go into, because she said there was an unnatural presence in there. Whenever she walked into the room, there was an icy coldness came about the room. It was so bad that they decided to leave the house. They were only tenants. But before leaving the house, the husband chose to do one or two jobs as part of his tenancy. He was moving a cupboard in the haunted bedroom, and he found a loose floorboard. He lifted the floorboard, and to his surprise he found an old leather purse, a little mildewed and rather damp. He opened the purse to find silver coins in it from the 1700s. They believe that he found Billy Treen's treasure. After it was found, they say that the house was haunted no more. Of course, we'll never know, because the house has gone, and now there are modern houses on the site where Billy Treen lived and died. And all that's left now is the memory of Billy Treen, the inscription and his gravestone. And of course, the roads in Warwickshire must be some of the most haunted roads in the country. Lying as it does in the centre of the country, anyone passing through north, south, east or west would have at some time to go through Warwickshire. And because of that, in the 18th century, it was a famous haunt for highwaymen. And the famous Dick Turpin, of course, was around here on many occasions. He worked the road between Leamington Spa and the Leicestershire border, which was known as Watling Street. On many occasions, his ghostly form has been seen by motorists, and one night a group of motorcyclists saw this figure sitting on a horse in the middle of the road with a tricorn hat and a red-lined cloak. They took evasive action and went to the right and left of him. Nobody hit him, and they pulled up and looked back, and he disappeared into the hedgerow. Dick Turpin forged a liaison with Tom King, the famous Birmingham highwayman, and they worked the roads together. Turpin was hanged at York in 1739, and Tom King was burnt at the stake at Sutton Park in Birmingham, which of course in those days was in Warwickshire. But of course, to bring it up to date, there are also modern ghost stories to do with the roads. And if you use the old Rugby to Coventry Road instead of using the motorway link, when you arrive near Church Lawford, beware of a ghost lorry that appears in front of you with its lights blazing on your side of the road. There's no need to take evasive action because it's nothing but a phantom. And when you turn and look, it will be gone. On the 23rd, 24th of October 1642 took place the first battle of the English Civil War. That battle took place more or less behind me in this valley. It was the Battle of Edge Hill in Warwickshire. Far over on the horizon, the village of Kinnerton was the front line of the Parliamentary Army. And I'm standing more or less where the front line of the Royalist Army was. And this site here was the site where King Charles I surveyed the battle. 100 years later, on the anniversary, they built this incredible inn called the Castle Inn. I'm standing here at dusk in January for a particularly good reason. 2 months after the battle took place, a group of farm workers and farm labourers were returning from the pub, and as they were nearing their homes, they noticed in the dusk sky a reenactment of that battle. That battle took place for 3 hours. They watched the whole battle taking place. They heard drums rolling and trumpets blowing. They saw banners waving, and they were horrified to hear the roar and the screams of the army and the flash and the bangs of the cannons. These workmen were terrified, and they went to the village of Kinnerton and woke up the magistrate, William Wood, and the local vicar, Samuel Marshall. They, of course, didn't believe them. But the following night, the workmen persuaded these two men to come back and survey the battlefield for themselves. And they were also witness to the same events. They saw the whole thing just as the workmen saw the night before. This went on for many weeks and could be seen by many of the villagers on Saturdays and Sunday nights. The king, who by this time was at Oxford, heard of the story and actually sent some of his royalist soldiers here to view it for themselves. They also saw the reenactment. They saw the flash of the cannons, they heard the roar of the parliamentary army when they thought that they defeated the king's men. They even saw some of the soldiers who had been friends of theirs that were killed during the battle. They came back and reported it to the king. Everyone, of course, had to believe this story. Within months, the king ordered that all the troops that were killed during the battle should be buried. And local priests and vicars came down to the battlefield and exorcised the ghosts. And they say, since that exorcism took place, that it is very rarely seen, but occasionally at dusk on the actual anniversary of the battle, that battle is seen yet again. And the best vantage point, of course, is here, looking down on the original battlefield here at Edge Hill, the first battle of the English Civil War, which of course eventually ended with the execution of King Charles I. And what better place to finish this tour of haunted Warwickshire than here at the romantic Kenilworth Castle. This was built around 1122, and of course, like many castles in the area, was the scene of many sieges, a lot of death and battle that took place here. But strangely enough, this is not the most haunted castle in England. Most of the ruins that you can see are Elizabethan. This was the home of Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, one of Queen Elizabeth's favourite suitors. If she was going to marry anyone, it would have been Robert Dudley. But of course, she married no one. There are ghost stories here, of course. Most of them come from the more or less intact gatehouse over there. There's a strange, icy feel to some of the rooms, and an oppressiveness inside that has caused people to leave the building. There is a headless white witch that has been seen wandering around that area, and a man in red has been seen wandering around here. But the staff tell me they believe that it could well be a jogger in a red jogging suit. Also, we've been told today only, when we were in the town, of an Elizabethan couple that have been seen walking arm in arm along the pathway towards the gatehouse. Perhaps they're the ghosts of the Earl of Leicester and Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth actually stayed here with the Earl of Leicester for 19 days. And it could well be their ghosts that still haunt this place, united in death, but of course never in life. Hello, my name's Richard Felix, and I'm here at my base at the old county jail in the centre of Derby. This place over the last 150 years has been a place of terror, torment, and of course death. And that's one of the reasons why this place is as haunted as it is. I've chosen Derby as the catalyst for the national ghost tour of Great Britain. Over the last 10 years, I have taken in excess of 95,000 people on a ghost tour somewhere around the Midlands. And of course, have spoken to many of those people on the tours, and of course have realised just how fascinated people are by ghosts. This is the reason that we have chosen to do this tour. The video that you've just watched is a part of that series, but I want your help. If you have a ghost story, then please either email me or write to me at the address that you'll see at the end of this video. Of course, you must remember that after speaking to so many people, I think I have an ability to be able to see through some of the stories, to be able to differentiate between a story that is true or a story that's made up. And of course, you must remember that 8 out of 10 ghost stories can be explained, but it's the other 2 that you've got to worry about. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Do sleep well and don't have nightmares.